Hi, I am here with Martin Yates, who is a pianist, a composer, and a conductor, and he conducts in opera houses all over the world. He is also a very much sought after guest conductor with orchestras such as the London Symphony Philharmonic, the Liverpool Philharmonic, the BBC Concert Orchestra, and of course our very own Hallé Orchestra, where Martin is coming along to conduct a brilliant concert on the 29th of July at the Bridgewater Hall, entitled Some Enchanted Evening, the music of Rodgers and Hammerstein. So I'm really excited to talk all things Rodgers and Hammerstein and musicals with you. So thank you, Martin.
Great pleasure.
So we have these big musicals of Rodgers and Hammerstein. So what can we expect with this concert? Are we going to see some of the, I say lesser known musicals, which sounds a bit awful, but you know what I mean, not like the big ones that everyone knows. Are we going to get a mixture of things? We know we've got the Hallé, and obviously we're going to get some amazing musical theatre singers as well. So what can you tell us?
Well, I put this concert together quite a few years ago originally, and then didn't do it, and then I've tried it a few places since. And the most important thing, it seems to me, that orchestras or orchestra managements and audiences, therefore, want is the famous stuff. So, but I always like, because I spend my life recording neglected classical music, the composers that people forgot about. Or the pieces that famous composers wrote that they forgot about. I always like to include something, and just so that people can think, oh, I didn't know about that one. I might investigate that. So of course you have to concentrate in a concert like this on what they call the big five. I mean, because people are expecting to hear the sound of music. They're expecting to hear the King and I South Pacific. And also it's such great music. Yes. And but I do include Love Look Away from the Flower Drum Song, which is a song that so many people have forgotten. And it's so beautiful. You know, the show perhaps isn't so appropriate these days, but it is, to be able to just take one song out of it and give it to a singer and say, can you sing this? And then when I did actually give it to Scott Davies, who was going to sing it, he said to me, oh, what the hell's this you've asked me to do? And then he looked it up, and then he started learning it, and then he phoned me up and said, Mike, it's amazing, isn't it? And but it's good to be able to do that. But of course, we have to concentrate. And I try to do it. I've done it in order, basically. Okay. Of the appearances of the shows. So starting with Oklahoma and then going to Carousel and then the intermission, and then we had to do South Pacific, King and I, and The Sound of Music. And in the middle of that, I put this one song from the Flower Drum Song. But it's big chunks, in Carousel, for instance, we do, everybody knows the tune If I Loved You, but some people don't realize that actually it's like a 9.5 minute scene. And If I Loved You comes only at the end. So it's the whole, how it's a bit like an operatic love duet. It's how you get to this. So that whole thing's included, including all the dialogue that goes between Julie and Billy. And it just makes such a perfect sense of what these two brilliant writers were able to do.
Yeah, and what do you think so Rodgers and Hammerstein, they were known as the golden age of musicals during their time. They won just about every award going. There's continuous revivals even now of their musical. I mean, we've got Oklahoma in the West End, King and I touring. What do you think is the secret of their success, of their longevity? What?
Well, I think I think what they had was truly inspirational for its time. If you remember, sort of think about the history of them, Richard Rodgers was writing with other people before he met up with Hammerstein. Hammerstein was writing with a variety of different people before he met up with Richard Rodgers. And of course, Rodgers and Hart was they were the big team, but they were very much of the 20s and 30s. It was very snappy and sharp and jazzy, and Oscar Hammerstein was writing Showboat, for instance, which is operetta in the grand old tradition, and I think when both men achieved greatness with those partners, but it was actually the coming together of it where Richard Rodgers had to change his style of writing to suit Hammerstein, who had to change his style of lyric writing to meet with Rodgers. And what they came up with in many ways, I mean, you know, you hear, if you ever listen to Andrew Lloyd Webber talking about it as heroes of Rodgers and Hammerstein, because ultimately he wouldn't write what he has written. He wouldn't have written what he's written if it wasn't for them. Yeah. Because that romantic yet quite direct way of putting a song across was very new. Until then, you know, a song, you know, you'd have a whole load of dialogue, and then, you know, you might talk about the fact that, you know, I think she's beautiful and I love her and all of that, and then you sing about the same old thing. They don't do that. You know, they get the dialogue and the goes and the music comes in underneath, and suddenly the song becomes an explanation of what it is they're talking about. So, and I think that people relate to that. I think the subjects are very, very unusual. I mean, you know, to write a musical that's acceptable about the Nazis, I mean, you know, it's very bold. And when you think when that was written, you know, and The King and I, you know, people look at that and say, you know, well, it's a bit colonial. Well, of course, but one can't ignore the fact that colonialism existed. South Pacific, I mean, that's an amazing score, and again, it's about the Second World War. You write that, I mean, it is quite bizarre and brilliant that they were able to do this. So I think that goes, you know, a lot for their longevity. And no two shows are the same.
No, they're not.
You know, they don't shoehorn a piece of music, with very few exceptions, that they wrote for another show into another score. You know, Getting to Know You, in fact, started out in South Pacific, but that's one of the few songs that did come from another show, but they'd never actually written the lyrics properly, I think. But very many of their scores were literally just written exactly for this kind of thing. And you couldn't take a song from The Sound of Music and put it into Oklahoma. It just doesn't feel right. You know, and what they achieved with that, you know, Oklahoma, of course, is their first show and their first hit. You know, and it came at a time when Americans were questioning what it was to be American. And yet here is this history piece of, you know, the Wild West, and yet without gunslinging. It's not corny. It's just reality of people. It could be a little village in England, you know, it could be in a village in France or Germany. You know, it's actually about being American. And I think that's for me what I could presume gives them their longevity, and really what makes people still respond to it.
Yeah. I mean, like you say, they really took on social issues and well, bigger issues, didn't they? And combining that with comedic dialogue and operatic technique and all of these things, it makes them stand out. And I'm just trying to think now, like, obviously we know that there's people that have been hugely influenced by them and wouldn't be doing, like you've just mentioned, Andrew Lloyd Webber, wouldn't necessarily be doing what they're doing without them. But do you think there's anything out there that's kind of comparable to what they did and what they achieved? Because I've been trying to think about this. And
well, I think on very varying different levels. Yes, I mean, I think Stephen Sondheim, although his name isn't perhaps on the lips of everybody, I say everybody, i.e. the public, in the way that Rodgers and Hammerstein is. I think that's, but his musicals definitely, Sweeney Todd, you know, for instance. Not everybody gets understands things like Little Night Music, but you know, something like Sweeney Todd, definitely it's a very forceful story that you know is propelled by the music in that way. But whether anybody, I suppose Lloyd Webber is the person who's had make a load of hits one after the other in the same way. And in the same way that has suffered in the same way that Rodgers and Hammerstein did, where not every show was a hit. You know, we talk about the five, but there are others, like the Flower Drum Song, which didn't particularly do it, Pipe Dream, which definitely didn't do it. You know, in the way that you can look at, say, you know, was Love Never Dies a great hit for Lloyd Webber? Not really, you know. Nice, good songs in it, but no, it wasn't a hit. Not like Phantom of the Opera, which you could compare Phantom of the Opera with The Sound of Music for being mega hit, you know. So I think it's difficult to say that, but I think, you see, we also live in an age where we expect so much. So somebody writes a musical and it's a big hit, and you think, well, what's the next one? Oh, well, that wasn't very good. Somebody writes a great novel. Oh, what's the follow-up? Oh, that's not as interesting. And these guys, they weren't doing that. They were just writing. And the fact that they wanted it to be a hit, of course they did. And they probably didn't, when they were writing Oklahoma, they probably thought they might not write together again. Then they write the next one. Oh, that's a hit. Then they write the one after. Oh, that's a hit. I don't think they were saying, and now what's he going to do? But I think we expect so much of people now. And because they have, pop artists. I mean, I don't know much about pop music, I'll be brutally frank, but my daughter, she loves pop music and she plays stuff. And, actually you realize there are people with like one hit and then what?
And then you never hear.
Well, exactly. I mean, you don't look at somebody's catalogue like, oh God, I know so little about it, but from the 60s and 70s, Petula Clark, hit after hit after hit after hit. There are not many people like this. There just aren't, and yet we expect so much. So, and I think there are musicals that are around that I've seen, excuse me, and very good, very challenging in the same way that Carousel is challenging. But whether they will then, these guys will whatever will then go and write something else that's of any consequence, you can't say. I always said about Mozart, not every piece is a masterpiece. There's many that are, but the guy wrote 600 pieces in a very short life. So I just think but I think the subjects, you touched on it, the subjects that they tackled are sometimes really contentious. Race relations in South Pacific. We're not doing it, but you think of that song, you've got to be carefully taught. You have to be carefully taught to hate people who don't look like you or me or think like us or don't come from the same place. I mean, that is bold, really, really bold. Carousel, it's the hero's a wife beater, I mean, and yet when he's there as the ghost and they're singing You'll Never Walk Alone and she feels him there and his voice says, I remember, Julie, I loved you. You are absolutely in bits, but this man is a wife beater.
It is. It's brilliant what they do. And the like you mentioned, You'll Never Walk Alone there. So another thing that they did, and some people do it, and I think Andrew Lloyd Webber has purposely set out to do it with some shows such as Jesus Christ Superstar, where you're trying to get the music to actually cross over into popular culture. And I don't know whether they set out to do that, but obviously they had that. I mean, one of the biggest ones ever, You'll Never Walk Alone, but they've had it with Some Enchanted Evening, and People Will Say We're in Love, and all these different ones. You've got people like Ella Fitzgerald doing them. So do you think that was part of their psyche, that they were trying to do that? Or
I don't think so, but if you go back thinking about what I said earlier on about who Richard Rodgers was, he was writing with Lorenz Hart, and almost every show they wrote, a hit came from. That's partly because popular music at the time came from musicals. Now pop music is written specifically to be pop. Somebody writes a song for an album, which they are going to, there are some composers, writers, Elton John, for instance, who then started writing musicals after he was already a very established act, But I think that we don't live in the age anymore where everybody looks to the musical, the Tony Bennett's or whatever, and say, oh, that's a great song, I'm going to record that, or the Sinatras. Nobody's really doing that anymore. You might get on Britain's Got Talent, somebody will come up and say, oh, I'm singing a song from, I don't know, Wicked or whatever. But it's not the same. Pop music doesn't come from the same source anymore. And I think that had a lot to do with it. I think that had a lot to do with the popularizing the shows when they were on, that Frank Sinatra sings whatever it was. I don't know, People Will Say We're in Love. I don't know if he did, actually, I'm getting it wrong, but that's the sort of idea that he did. And then people heard it on the radio and they said, oh, that's also actually from Oklahoma, which is running at the whatever theater in Broadway. That sort of doesn't happen anymore. We went through a phase, I suppose, then where artists who were famous in a musical suddenly appear singing the song that they sing in the musical. Excuse me. So like Julie Andrews from My Fair Lady, Richard Burton from Camelot. You know, you can look him up on YouTube, and everyone says Richard Burton singing. I can't. He does. You know, at the Tony Awards, there he is singing Camelot. No, and so everyone says, "Oh my God, that's Richard Burton." Yeah, and he's in that musical. No, really. But it's a whole different thing now, I think. And also, I think because, you know, I did stop conducting classical music for a while when I was much younger, and I did conduct the very early days of Phantom of the Opera and right at the beginning, and Sunset Boulevard and all of those. I did it for about 8 years, and that was at a time with really one exception or two exceptions: the opening of Phantom, which of course was Michael Crawford, and everyone at the time was saying, "Michael Crawford? Some others do have him. Are you serious?" And the other exception, of course, was all the ladies that went into Sunset Boulevard, which of course includes Elaine Page, who was a star, and Glenn Close, who was a star, and Petula Clark, who was a star. You know, but most of the shows opened, I wouldn't say anonymously, but the show was the star.
Yes.
You know, so we had gone from, you know, Richard Burton and Julie Andrews in Camelot to Miss Saigon. You know, that was the star. With a few exceptions. And I think, you know, that has sort of changed a bit now, where suddenly the audience is perhaps wanting more brand recognition. So whether it's somebody they saw on television, or, you know, they know from a movie or whatever, you know, that, or a reality star, God forbid, you know, I'm sure there are some great ones, but you know what I mean. And I think that, you know, that also has an awful lot to do with the way people perceive, you know, a musical or a song or whatever it is, you know. Yeah, but it's, I mean, sorry, yeah.
No, carry on, go on.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's fascinating when you actually look at the heritage of the people who wrote these things. I'm sorry, that's my dog barking in the background. She's annoying. You know, the fact that Hammerstein passed on his trade directly to Stephen Sondheim. Yeah. You know, he virtually adopted him, and he, you know, Sondheim lived with the Hammersteins, and you can hear the clever sort of wordplay, which is romantic wordplay that Hammerstein had, which Sondheim uses and turns into something more sardonic. Yeah. You know, it's not the same as, say, Lorenz Hart, who wrote with Richard Rodgers early on. His lyrics are fantastic with their internal rhymes, and they're snappy. And you know, there's a song in The Girlfriend. Isn't it great? Isn't she? Isn't it neat? She's gentle and mentally nearly complete. You know, I mean, it's just so brilliantly scanned. You know, that Sondheim does a bit of that. He does. But he does it within the romantic feeling of Hammerstein. So he says something to you which you could take at face value, but it might not be. You know, and I think Hammerstein was brilliant at that, and Rodgers was brilliant at that. He writes a song that has two verses, two choruses. He doesn't always put the same accompaniment on the second time round, because it's all about different things. Somebody saying "If I Love," for instance, you know, they get the song goes more and more passionately, and it gets to the climax, and you know suddenly they've changed from "If I Loved You" to you know, "I'm in love with you," and then suddenly it gets to the climax and they realize, oh my God, oh, but of course I don't love you, yeah. And it stops. You know, that is brilliant. You know, and their use of underscoring is brilliant. You know, the music continues when they're talking, people are talking, and then they come back into song, and then they go out of it again. And that's Sondheim definitely inherited that. You know, yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And I think picking up on what you were saying about what people want these days and everything, and I think the Hallé, I mean, we've not even really mentioned them too much yet, but the Hallé are really brilliant at doing this, because obviously they still offer all of the traditional, the classical, all of these things, but they're now making music so welcoming and accessible to get people to come and listen to live music, whether it be a musicals evening such as this one, or whether it's popular culture, the music of James Bond, or when they play films and they're playing the live orchestra to the score. Yeah. even went to a Victoria Wood music one a couple of weekends ago. They're so inclusive, and I think that's just important, isn't it? That we get people appreciating and listening to live music.
Absolutely.
There is such a vast, and what the Hallé are doing is brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's whatever the music is, if an orchestra has agreed to play it, they want to play it, they will always play it to the best. The Hallé absolutely included, because it's vital to, even if it's music that people don't like, they must play it. They will, and play it to excess. The wonderful thing about Rodgers and Hammerstein is that you can really play to excess. So everything that's romantic can be really romantic, and everything that's glamorous can be really glamorous. But I think there's a whole different, lots of levels of how these sort of things come about, and what one does with them. Music education is something that it's tedious to talk about, because but when I was a kid, music was free, and and it's gone back to being for the elite. Those parents that can afford to have violin lessons for their children, which is a shame. But it does mean that the importance of what the Hallé do can never be underestimated. It's because that is sometimes people's only contact with real music, people playing, and it is quite amazing. When I conduct a Covent Garden, they always have a program, a day, a performance that is paid for by some great philanthropist, and you get children in from the predominantly, I suppose, inner city of London, of course, because it's nearby. But amazing the amount of kids, and you think, something I did not long ago was Manon by Massenet, very complicated, and you think, oh God, 3 acts of this, what are they going to make of this? Silent, and totally, they couldn't believe it, and those that are close to me, hanging over the pit rail, just looking at this, 85 players, and my God, look at that, what are those? There's 10 of those, well, there's cellos, and to have that experience is really, really vital. And in an audience of 1,000, maybe 10 people who think, actually, I think I could come to something again. It's vital, absolutely vital. And the fact that British orchestras were a little bit late coming to a popular music party. It was always done in America. Always, the American summer season goes on with Philadelphia or New York, and they have their pops, and it could be all of the things you just said, the James Bond, the musicals, the films, or whatever. People were a bit sniffy about it in the UK. I'm not really sure why. I think it's just because we never presented it terribly well, and I think it's got to be presented seriously with some humour, but the music has to be played, and the Hallé do. I'm sure it's my first time with the Hallé. So it's the one of the. In fact, I think the one orchestra in the UK that I haven't conducted before. So it's going to be great fun.
Yeah.
But a long time ago, my conducting teacher, one of my conducting teachers, was the great Andre Preman, and Andre always said to me, Martin, there are 2 types of music, good and bad. Doesn't matter which side of the tracks they come from. Even in pop music, there will be bad music. In classical music, there will be bad music. But there's good in all. And that is true. James Bond, you listen to most of those James Bond songs. I can't say all of them, but most of them, and you just think, oh my goodness, the sound is just unique. And mostly they're written by, different composers. And yet, there's something about the sound that those clever composers, whether it's Marvin Hamlish in The Spy Who Loved Me, he keeps Marvin Hamlish of a chorus line and The Way We Were, and he puts it into Bond. It's extraordinary, absolutely brilliant. And you do ABBA at the Hallé, and those songs are timeless.
Yeah.
Why? But you see, you come back to your question about what is it about Rodgers and Hammerstein. It could be the same thing about Benny and Bjorn, who wrote the ABBA songs.
Yeah,
they're great tunes. People like a melody, that they can latch onto. And the brilliant thing about pop music is it's a distillation of classical music, really. In a symphony, we have, an introduction the first time out of the tune, then we develop the tune, and then we have a bit at the end, but the tune gets developed, so you keep hearing it. you don't just get da 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 once. You just keep, and the pop music does the same thing, but only in 3 minutes. So you suddenly get to the chorus and everyone just goes, oh, I know the chorus, and then it goes on, and then it's a key change and you do the chorus again, and but they're melodies, aren't they? People love melodies,
They are. And we're going to get some brilliant, beautiful melodies. And what a combination, your first time at the Hallé, all of your wealth of experience, the brilliant Hallé and the music of Rodgers and Hammerstein. It is going to be a memorable evening. It's Saturday, the 29th of July at the Bridgewater Hall. So thank you so much for chatting with us, Martin. I know you're incredibly busy. You're not even in the UK at the minute. So thank you so much for your time, and we cannot wait to see you conducting the Hallé.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much.